A year ago, I had David Sirota on the show to talk about 50 years of corruption in American politics and how a 1971 memo by the Supreme Court Justice Lewis Powell set the stage for Project 2025. Now, at the time that we spoke, the election was still in play. But today, the world, it feels fundamentally different than it did just that short time ago. Among other things, David is the founder of the news organization The Lever. He was the former speechwriter for Bernie Sanders and the co-writer of the Netflix hit Don't Look Up.
There's a 100% chance that we're all going to die!
This month, he released a new book called Master Plan, The Hidden Plot to Legalize Corruption in America. And can you think of a better title to explain the plot of the year 2025? Well, except maybe, of course, that plot, it's not hidden anymore. The corruption he wrote about in his book seems as plain as day to anyone who has been paying attention. One thing, though, that surprised me about recording this interview yesterday afternoon is that, well, it ended up being more hopeful than I had expected. I mean, yes, we talk about the roots of corruption and the apparent legalization of crime under Trump, but he helped me reframe how I think about the source of that corruption in a way that is somehow more manageable than what social media reduces to simply rage without an actionable plan. So let's dig in. Thanks for being on the show, David.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
All right. So pretty much everyone knows that money and politics go hand in hand. But there was one Supreme Court case that supercharged the problem. Explain the Citizens United case to me and what it did to American democracy.
The Citizens United case was the culmination of a master plan to legalize corruption in America. It was not a one-off. It was not an anomaly. It was the final, well, I guess it wasn't really the final stage, but it was the big foundational step, capping off what took really 50 years. And the story starts all the way back in the early 1970s at a time that seemed like a big victory for anti-corruption. The Watergate situation had happened, and out of the Watergate scandal, which was the first dark money scandal in modern political history, suitcases of cash from major corporations going into the Nixon campaign. What came out of that was the original anti-corruption laws, things like campaign contribution limits, disclosure laws, how much we have a right to know who's funding which politicians' campaigns. That was a big victory for the anti-corruption movement in America. But at the same time, there was this master plan hatched by, at that point, out-of-power conservatives to already begin dismantling those new laws. And it started with this tobacco lawyer named Lewis Powell. Lewis Powell was on the board of Philip Morris, and he was a prominent corporate attorney. And he had read an article in Fortune magazine about the successes of Ralph Nader and the consumer movement. And this incensed him. And he wrote this memo, now famous memo, to the Chamber of Commerce saying essentially the free market system is under attack. The Naderites are winning. We, corporations, executives, the elite, the oligarchy, whatever you want to call it, we need to do a much better job of investing in politics and media to make the democracy not work as well as it's working. In other words, democracy had become the problem. The government had become too responsive to the public, passing things like anti-corruption laws and consumer safety protections and the like. And Lewis Powell, soon after writing that memo, really just a few months after writing that memo, got a call from Richard Nixon to appoint him to the Supreme Court. And in our book, Master Plan, you'll see, and it sounds like I'm making this up, but literally Philip Morris held a send-off gala for Lewis Powell. We actually found the vinyl record of the recording, and there's photos on the front of the record cover showing Lewis Powell being given a judicial robe with corporate logos emblazoned on it. And he is sent off to the Supreme Court. And very soon after, Lewis Powell begins engineering court rulings that effectively begin deregulating the campaign finance system. One ruling takes a radical, certainly at the time, a very radical fringe theory that money in politics isn't corruption or influence. Money in politics is constitutionally protected speech. The Supreme Court, with Lewis Powell on it, enshrines that as a precedent. Soon after that, Lewis Powell then works behind the scenes, and we have the memos, him writing in the margins of different documents that you can see in our book Master Plan, where Lewis Powell takes a relatively obscure case from Massachusetts and uses it to say that now corporations have a constitutional right to spend in an unlimited way to buy elections. And those court rulings end up becoming the foundation of Citizens United, which was authored by the immediate successor to Lewis Powell, Anthony Kennedy.
And so now we're in this place where Citizens United comes in. Giving money to politicians and the super PACs and stuff is protected under free speech, of all things. How does this explicitly make bribery legal?
So Citizens United is premised on the idea that, and there's a famous quote, it's about independent expenditures. And when you hear independent expenditures, what you need to hear is essentially expenditures from corporations. And what the quote basically says is that independent expenditures cannot be corrupting in campaigns because they are independent. In fact, I'll read you the quote because it's so mind-boggling. Okay, this is the ruling from Citizens United. Quote, "This court now concludes that independent expenditures, including those made by corporations, do not give rise to corruption or the appearance of corruption." Now, it goes on. It gets even better. This is still a direct quote from the ruling. Quote, "That speakers may have influence over or access to elected officials does not mean that those officials are corrupt, and the appearance of influence or access will not cause the electorate to lose faith in this democracy."
That is bananas. That is basically saying that, like, how can they define it doesn't even give the appearance? Like, how can they say what makes something appear in a way or not?
Right. So that's the premise for the idea that independent expenditures, super PAC expenditures, cannot be corrupting. See, what's going on here is that the Supreme Court has created this idea that money that has a direct quid pro quo can be regulated in the campaign finance system. The court still sort of rhetorically says that is true. That's why, at least for now, and we can get into where this is going, but at least for now, campaign contributions, direct money directly to politicians, are still under the current Supreme Court precedent. Uh, that's still regulatable. So what the court was doing in Citizens United was saying, well, there are these things that are technically independent from candidates. Now, it's a legal fiction that a super PAC supporting Senator, Joe Schmo, run by Senator Joe Schmo's former campaign aides, the idea that that's really independent from Joe Schmo is a legal fiction. But the court is saying, because these super PACs are independent, that means that the money can't be corrupting. It is absolutely absurd, but that is what they are sort of standing on. Now, of course, as I'm alluding to, there are a couple cases before the Supreme Court now which are challenging even that. And in the realm of anti-bribery laws, right, there's campaign finance laws, and then there's straight up anti-bribery laws. There's a whole separate string of cases. This is the Republican Governor Bob McDonnell of Virginia case. This is the aides to Chris Christie case, the aides to Andrew Cuomo case. There's been a lot of these bribery convictions that have been overturned by the Supreme Court concurrently to these Citizens United and Citizens United related cases. And what these are doing are trying to narrow the definition of what an official act is by politicians. The idea being that if a politician gets money but hasn't returned the favor with an official act in their role as a government official, then there isn't bribery. This all culminated most recently with a case out of Indiana. I mean, it's completely insane, where a mayor, small town mayor, was convicted on bribery charges for he awarded a government contract to a local contractor, which soon after gave him a $10,000 payment. And the court ruled, well, the sequence of events aren't bribery. That wasn't a bribe, that was a gratuity. So this is where we are, right?
Yeah.
The court is saying corporate money flowing into politics, into so-called independent expenditures, helping elect and re-elect lawmakers, that can't corrupt those lawmakers. And meanwhile, money also flowing to politicians, in some cases directly into their own personal bank account. This isn't bribery if the sequence is changed up, or if they're not officially delivering a so-called official act. So what we're getting at is a fully deregulated situation where everything is up for sale. Now, I think the big question that folks might be asking is, well, okay, if all that's true, who wants to legalize corruption? Who wants to legalize bribery, right? I mean, it's a fair question. And the answer, I think, really does go back to the Powell memo. And I think what it gets at is, if you are an oligarch, a billionaire, a giant corporation, you understand that in a functioning one person, one vote democracy, a healthy democracy, the government is probably going to respond more aggressively to voter pressure to actually deliver real benefits to voters and crack down on the worst behavior of corporations and oligarchs. That's bad for your bottom line. And so what they realized was, we have to short circuit that democratic process to make it more like $1 is one vote. And so to do that, if you deregulate the campaign finance system and narrow anti-bribery laws down to nothing, it means you can essentially buy the election process and buy the legislative process.
Well, and you mentioning these official acts, like, I hadn't heard of it used in sort of campaign finance terms, and there's something fascinating about there, because there was also, and a question that I have written down here in front of me, I also wanted to talk about that same phrase used in a recent court case. So last year, the Supreme Court, and it was the case Trump versus the United States, that the former president or former presidents could not be prosecuted for, quote, official acts. And that case was specifically around documented election fraud in the 2020 election. You remember these tapes of Trump saying, I just need to find 400 votes in Georgia, or whatever the number was. So that said, that official acts like that, like his use of lies and fraud, was actually in his official responsibility, so he couldn't be prosecuted for it. Now, which is a totally insane thing. It's basically saying fraud should be legal. Now, in her dissent, Sotomayor wrote that when he uses his official powers, he's talking about the president, in any way under the majority's reasoning, now he will be insulated from criminal prosecution. If he orders the Navy SEAL Team 6 to assassinate a political rival, immune. Organizes a military coup to hold on to power, immune. Takes a bribe in exchange for a pardon, immune. So that was written right before Trump took office, right before the election. How have we seen these new powers deployed in Trump 2?
Yeah, I mean, I think every day you wake up and you see headlines about Trump using the government in a transactional way, oftentimes to enrich himself, his family, his donors, et cetera, et cetera. I just think, like, there are so many examples. It's hard to really. You don't even have to pick out one, right? I mean, and the thing is with Trump, I'm not crediting him for this, but I do think it's actually there's a good quality to the fact that there's no pretense, right? That I think we've lived through multiple stages of corruption. This is sort of end stage corruption, where in the 70s and 80s, okay, there had been that effort after Watergate to really crack down on corruption. And for a short while, there was an effort to root out, explicit, brazen, soft corruption. But what happened was the laws were essentially making systematic the corruption. So I'll give you a really good example of this. Out of the 1970s, out of that Watergate era, they passed the Federal Election Campaign Act. Okay, big victory for anti-corruption reformers. The master planners start scheming. They get those court rulings I mentioned, but they also get written into the post-Watergate amendments to the Federal Election Campaign Act, a loophole creating the corporate PAC, the Corporate Political Action Committee, which of course comes to dominate American politics. So, in a sense, what is rooted out of politics, at least for a while, is the sort of really sleazy corruption, like the cash in an envelope or a paper bag for a government contract. But it's made more systematized. Now, a corporation can write an official check from its corporate PAC to a legislator, the committee chairman, to get what it wants. Then you get into, I think, sort of the Clinton Bush era, which is where corruption, the soft money, you get a corruption that's I would say no one's out saying, "Hey, we are being corrupt," but there's sort of an acknowledgement that money in politics is a powerful force, and the parties. It's basically a supposition. But now we're in the end stage where I don't think Donald Trump, in some ways, is trying to hide it. Like he may be a pathological liar in what he says on his individual statements, but he's not trying to pretend he sees government as anything other than a transactional affair. And that the skimming, the old corruption, the sort of greasy cash stuffed in the envelope kind of corruption is back. I mean, we had the story recently. I mean, Tom Homan, his prospective border czar, reportedly gets caught on an FBI tape taking a paper bag filled with $50,000 of cash in exchange for promises that he will deliver if he is appointed to Trump's administration. He will deliver contracts to the donor, right? I mean, so we're all and when you saw JD Vance respond recently on a Sunday show to that situation, he was asked about this by George Stephanopoulos, and I'm paraphrasing here, but Vance basically said, listen, there was no evidence of illegal conduct. And I think if we hone in on what Vance is actually saying, I think he's pinning that argument on the idea that the Supreme Court has so narrowed the bribery laws that it arguably isn't clear whether what Homan reportedly did is illegal, right? And so I think we see it every day, and I think and it's all a long way of saying, in some ways, I think this is not a good development, but at least now there's no pretense. At least now, you don't have to convince anyone that the system is endemically corrupt and that this is all happening in our face. Like, we don't have to get over the hurdle of, let me convince you that it's as bad as it actually is. People see that. The question now is what to do about it.
It's really funny that you mentioned that, because like most of the days that I spend now is I'm on my computer, I read the New York Times for the day or NPR or whatever, and there's always a new bribery scandal, new cryptocurrency scandal, something where Trump is getting. Recently was the DOJ. He's asking the DOJ for $240 million. No idea why. It's just a thing that happens. But I think, and I have this feeling as a journalist, and I'm sure you've had this before, it's like, look, there's an injustice. We must point to the injustice and fix the injustice, and if we tell the truth, the problem will somehow fix itself. I don't know. UFOs come down and they set the thing right. what you're saying is weirdly hopeful, is that we've made the case, guys. Like, the case has been made. If you can't see the corruption, you're just literally blind. It's a disability at this point. So, so what is the hopeful message there? Like, is the hopeful message is now that we have made the case, now we have to be the ones to solve it? Like, how'd they do it in Nixon's time? How'd they do it pre-1970?
Well, here's the crazy thing.
Mm-hmm.
Before we get to what some of the solutions are. The crazy thing is that Donald Trump, according to the latest Reuters poll, the Republicans are more trusted to combat corruption than the Democrats are, by about 6 or 7 points, according to the Reuters' most recent poll. And for those worried about the midterm elections, Donald Trump in 2016, in the last poll taken before the 2016 election, was losing to the Democrats on every issue other than corruption. So arguably, we are in a similar 2016-esque moment, at least right now. I think that's because the Democrats really haven't made a very forceful anti-corruption argument. The arguments that they've made are sort of anti-Trump. The anti-corruption argument is in service of anti-Trump, an anti-Trump argument, as opposed to being willing to make a larger argument that the entire system is systematically corrupt. I think back to John McCain in 2000, when John McCain almost won the Republican nomination for president by campaigning in a way where he said the entire system is corrupt. And I think that gave him a lot of authenticity. And remember, John McCain back then had been singed by a corruption scandal, the Keating 5 scandal. And McCain came to the anti-corruption cause with the zeal of a convert. And I think the Democrats haven't done that yet. And so I think Donald Trump being sort of implicitly honest about the transactional view he has of government and the corruption, I think people are like, the danger is that it normalizes it, that we're moving towards seeing corruption as just the way politics are, as not scandalous, not controversial. Oh, that's just politics, even though it doesn't have to be. So your question about what can be done about this, I think everyone's looking for that, for an answer to that. Before we get to, okay, there's nothing to be done. My fear is that too many people say nothing can be done, but things can be done. Things are being done. The most prominent example to me right now is in New York City. And I preface this by saying, I don't care if you're listening to this, if you're watching this, I don't care what you think of Zoran Mamdani's particular policies. That doesn't matter. What matters is that Zoran Mamdani is running against tens of millions of dollars spent against him. He is being grossly outspent by the oligarchy because he's campaigning on a message that they should have less power. The thing to take away from this is, well, how is he able to run a competitive campaign when all the money is up against him? I mean, typically, you can't get anywhere. You can't get to square one, right? And there's been this whole debate, maybe it's his charisma, or he has got slick, TikTok ads, or, he's got a great message. All of those things matter far less than the fact that New York City has a system of publicly financing its campaigns. So New York City is one of the 26 cities in the United States where candidates have a way to run for office. It's a voluntary system where they raise small dollar money, which is then matched by government money, to give you enough money that doesn't come with the expectations of legislative favors, enough money not to outspend your opponent, but to at least be competitive. And so you want an anti-corruption idea. There's one that already exists. Publicly financed campaigns where candidates can run for office not having to go beg donors who want legislative favors for money. That already exists in 14 states and 26 cities. They're not as robust as New York's. New York has an 8-to-1 match, so Mamdani could run a real campaign. There's a whole other situation happening now in Montana. You've got luminaries from both parties in that state who are pushing a ballot measure which would say that corporations no longer in Montana and corporations operating in Montana, they no longer have the power to spend on elections. Now, this goes to the whole corporations are people idea. I'm sure people have heard about that. There's the famous Mitt Romney quote. Citizens United and all these cases related to Citizens United and the campaign finance system treat corporations as people because state laws treat corporations as people. That the idea that corporations are created out of state law is sacrosanct. It's backed by decades, it's really centuries of Supreme Court law. So that's not a sort of something that's in flux at all. States essentially charter corporations. And in a previous era, 100 years ago, states used to say, okay, corporations, when we charter you, you have this power, you have that power, you have that power, but you don't have this power. So what's going on in Montana is Montana saying, hey, we can, even under the existing Citizens United paradigm, we can say all our corporations that operate in our state, whether they're based in our state or operating in our state, they have all the powers that they currently have, except one power. They are not allowed to spend in our elections. And this is a way, you're not going to stop individual billionaires from spending, but you can really take a step forward to stopping corporations, because this is based on the Supreme Court's own precedents and principles.
Wait, so you said that you couldn't stop billionaires from giving in these elections. You know, we both live in Denver, and we've seen that even our school board elections are being, billionaires are coming in trying to influence the way that our politics work here. But it also strikes me that most billionaires, if you look at billionaires' finances, someone like Elon Musk, for instance, has a net worth of $0 on the books, right? Because all of his money is actually in trusts and in corporations and in other places. So that individual billionaire, in order to contribute to one of these campaigns, they'd somehow have to put money in their own pockets, wouldn't they?
Yes. Essentially, yes. They can certainly move it directly into their own controlled super PAC, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, the beauty of what's going on in Montana is it will not stop individual wealthy people from spending large amounts of money on elections, because that is enshrined in the whole Citizens United line of cases. But the other part of what's going on in Montana is it would mean that those billionaires would have to spend through political committees, which are different from corporations. Political committees require robust disclosure. So in other words, it would not only stop the big bad corporation from just dumping a lot of money from its corporate treasury into skewing the election. It would also force the individual billionaires who own the companies or who are at the top of the companies that if they still want to spend, they can spend, because that is right now their First Amendment right, but they have to spend through committees in a way that lets us know that they are spending, as opposed to being completely anonymous. I mean, that gets at the problem of anonymous spending. I mean, it's one thing to buy an election the way Elon Musk did in 2024. Nobody was under any illusion that that was Elon Musk spending the money. But a lot of the money that goes into buying elections, we have no idea where it's coming from. We don't even know who's making the arguments, right? And it's compounded by the fact that it could be a billionaire who wants a specific policy, but we don't know who that billionaire is. And they're under no obligation to, when they fund those ads, to even advertise about the thing that they actually want. Right? They are completely camouflaged in manipulating our elections.
Speaking about manipulating elections, I mean, the question of, is our vote going to be fair is one that, it goes all the way back to the origins of the Constitution. And we see right now not only money going into politics, right, to get people to vote in one way or another, influence their actual vote. We also see competing redistricting efforts, right? We have a redistricting effort over in California, competing with Texas, competing with Virginia, competing, with Trump saying, hey, we can just go get more. I just want you to find me more districts, essentially. And at the same time, we also know that Trump is basically a criminal, like, not only a convicted criminal, felon, 34 counts, but his cronies just bought Dominion voting, with that conspiracy that happened after the 2020 election. We have gotten into all of all Dominion voting is now hacked and whatever else. Now he controls that thing. And he's been saying all along that he could, influence that these voting machines are hackable. Where do you feel like the legitimate fight is, like out in the open, versus what's going on criminally that we don't have access to, don't have vision on?
I think we need to understand that Donald Trump is doing everything he can to amass as much power and control for himself. I don't think Donald Trump is much of an ideologue on policy. I think Donald Trump needs to be understood as an authoritarian in the sense of he'll grab any ideology if that serves his project of amassing power for himself. So I think you've seen that in the media consolidation space, where he is almost openly predicating approvals and disapprovals of mergers based on whether those media outlets are going to give him the kind of media coverage that he wants or doesn't want. The Dominion, his cronies now owning the company that deals with election machines. Whether or not there's a direct sort of blueprint for control there, I think we have to see it through the prism of him and his network, essentially his political machine, using whatever it can to have some level of control, or even the image of control, right? Like the image becomes reality, the presumption that we should not get out of line. There's a way to understand what America is becoming through the term competitive authoritarianism. A political scientist has used that, which is that there still are competitive elections in America. There still is a competitive political process. There still are some democratic, small d democratic institutions left, but the state has been fused with the Republican Party right now, and the state is essentially putting its thumb on the scale, so that elections are still competitive, but the playing field, if you will, is tilted. And so I see all of this across, whether it's inside the government, Trump getting rid of independent watchdogs, whether it's mass firings of federal employees, whether it's predicating merger approvals on political ideology, whether it's donors now owning pieces of the election infrastructure. It's all part of tilting the basic playing field of democracy towards the guy in power.
Where do you see the Epstein files fitting into this whole morass?
Yeah, I think obviously Trump is trying to keep that under wraps because in my view, he's afraid of something. I mean, what exactly he's afraid of, I'm not going to start speculating on that, but he's clearly afraid of something, and he's getting his party to help keep as much of it under wraps as possible. Again, in a normal, healthy, functioning democracy, the Congress, a separate institution from the presidency, even though it doesn't behave like that anymore, the Congress would be embarking on an investigation, right? I mean, I think what I'm kind of getting at here is this deeper problem where the founders presumed that each individual branch of government would have its own prerogatives and guard its prerogatives jealously, that the courts would guard try to guard its power. The Congress would try to assert its power and guard its power, et cetera, et cetera. But actually, that's not really the way American politics is functioning right now. What it really is functioning as is you've got the majority party that understands that if you're a Republican in Congress, getting crosswise on behalf of the Congress, getting crosswise with the White House gets you punished, as opposed to gets you rewarded inside the institution that you're defending. The party is what matters far more than the individual branches. It's the same thing with the judicial rulings for Trump. The judicial rulings that go out of their way to give the current Republican president more power from Republican judges suggest that the judiciary isn't, as the framers had originally presumed, guarding its institutional power. That's not what's happening. The party is protecting its power across all of the branches. And that sort of undermines and short circuits what the whole checks and balances concept is based on.
When we talk about the framers, right? We often say these framers, these erudite and forward-thinking gentlemen came up with a government that was going to last a long time, several hundred years at least. But the other thing that we sort of forget about the framers when we talk about that is they had just completed a revolution where they said, let's break all the laws and create, through force of arms and through, all the things that happened in the revolution to enable the creation of a new system. In the place where we are right now, does America need a new constitution? Is that a thing, or can you work within the system and within the judicial precedents that exist and somehow from the inside fix it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the big questions. I mean, I personally have not given up completely on making the current system work. But I think that part of making the current system work is, frankly, requires a far more engaged population that doesn't allow something like endemic corruption to become normalized. I mean, I do believe that Donald Trump is pushing the system to its breaking point, but let's be really honest about it. I think that Donald Trump is as much a symptom as he is the catalyst. The system has been pushed to the brink over decades of the public wanting things, basic necessities, in the richest country on earth, and the government constantly denying those things in order to enrich the people who pay to elect the government. I mean, that has created, frankly, I think the crisis of democracy. That I think of one big example. I think of, I did a whole audio series on it called Meltdown, which was, the premise was, the question was, how do you go from Barack Obama, Hope and Change in 2008 to Donald Trump, right? American Carnage, right? Hope and Change becomes Donald Trump's American Carnage speech. And I think the answer, I mean, we did a whole series on it, but I think in summary, the answer is, if you turn hope and change, if you raise people's hopes in the middle of the financial crisis with a very populist FDR-esque campaign, people forget that, and then you get into power with a large mandate, and you then make decisions to side with the Wall Street donors who are foreclosing on 10 million families, throwing 10 million families out of their homes and cratering the economy, and you are siding with them. You are protecting them from prosecution. You are bailing them out with hundreds of billions of dollars. You are going to create a social crisis because you are essentially going in front of the voters and tearing up the social contract that you promised. And that creates conditions, in my view, for the Tea Party and then for Donald Trump. And so I guess that's a long way of getting at saying that those decisions didn't have to be made, right? A different set of decisions could have been made and can still be made. There is a counter history here where after the 2008 election, liberals and Democrats didn't just go back to brunch, where they said, okay, we were made a lot of promises, and now we are angry, and we are going to hold accountable the Obama administration and its huge majorities in Congress, by the way, to actually deliver in a way that somebody like FDR delivered, to show that the system can work. The problem is that we've now gone through what I just laid out, and so people's faith in anyone delivering anything meaningful is understandably very low. There's almost no faith. I mean, that is the central problem for Democrats right now when you see it in polling. That it's not that people disagree with some of the things that the Democrats are pushing, higher taxes on the wealthy, et cetera, et cetera. It's that most people don't believe the Democrats are even serious about delivering those things. It's hard to believe that they would even try to deliver those things. So I guess what I'm getting at is, I don't think the system can't work. I think the system will not work unless both parties are pushed in a real and constant way by voters to deliver, and when they don't deliver, they are held accountable.
Mm-hmm. Which is why apathy has worked so well for the Republicans, right? The
100%.
disinformation, the tech platforms that just make people fight each other on Twitter, wherever, Threads now, I guess, versus actually engaging in the politics as they are. I mean, if you look at I'm sure if you look at the comments on this video, right, you're going to see people down there being like, it doesn't matter, Democrats and Republicans are all the same, and they in a way they sort of are, right? Democrat Party has such enormous problems, but then their solution to that is don't vote, just whatever. Like, I don't know.
There's also the idea that both parties aren't serious about delivering for me economically. So I'm just going to look at politics as just like a TV show where they're arguing about culture and so-called social issues. But I have no belief that they will actually materially improve my life. I think that's where we are right now. And I do not blame voters for feeling that way, that because they have lived through 40, 50 years of politics not materially improving their lives. And arguably worse, policies that are portrayed as they are going to materially improve people's lives and then doing the opposite. I mean, I think about the example of the Affordable Care Act. I mean, I'm old enough to remember how that debate unfolded. That the Affordable Care Act came out of obviously a massive healthcare crisis that was happening in the late 2000s that had been developing over decades. And Obama got into office, and quickly he and Rahm Emanuel and others in his administration ruled out from the get-go anything like Medicare for all, and then ultimately dropped even their promise to create a public health insurance option. And we got the Affordable Care Act. And I remember at the time I was one of the few people, and I'm not saying like I told you so, but I was one of the few people who were like, look, listen, fortifying the financial, economic, and political power of the health insurance industry is not going to solve this problem. Continuing to fortify the corporate behemoths in between people and their physicians is not ultimately going to solve the problem. And here we are. So there's another example of the public being told, hey, we solved the problem. And then the problem isn't solved. And it's worth mentioning, the problem isn't solved in part because of the fact that corruption rules the day, that the health insurance companies got what they wanted. They spent a lot of money on politicians to get what they wanted.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's still fascinating to me that Democrats try to uphold the Obamacare, right? The American the ACA, right? They say, look, we have to protect these last vestiges. Well, some small section of that bill still exists, and we have to protect it. When in reality, the entire idea behind it was basically the Republican plan from 1995, just reimagined for the mid 2000s or whenever it came out. So it does seem to me that there is a bit of a hopeful message here. And the hopeful message is it's gotten so bad, it's so obvious that now we can do something about it. And it does surprise me that you have a little bit of still a faith in the system from working. It sounds like you're saying it's more of a clogged machine more than a whole replacement of the machine.
Yeah, I mean, but I'm also not I'm not opposed to wholesale change. I mean, look, there's a strong argument that, and I think it's a good one, that there needs to be a constitutional amendment about money in politics to overturn effectively Citizens United. I don't think that the enshrining the idea that money is free speech as a precedent is acceptable, right? I mean, we have to confront that head on.
So to change the conversation just slightly, you released this book, Master Plan, right? And it's like a 300-ish, 250-page book or so. Why? But you'd already done a podcast, right? You already had done a podcast. We did a whole show earlier about it. Why also make a book?
Well, first and foremost, not everyone who enjoys podcasts. There are a lot of book readers who don't listen to podcasts. So we wanted to make it available to as many people as possible. That's the mundane answer. The other answer is I wanted the documents that we uncovered for the first time ever. And the thing is that the book is called The Hidden Plot to Legalize Corruption in America. And people will hear that. I'm sure there are going to be people in the comments. Oh, I already know that. I already know what that is. I've already seen that. You've got nothing new here. Trust me on one thing. You do not know the half of this story because it has been secret. And these are documents that have never before seen the light of day. We're talking about meetings at Disney World, secret meetings to plot how to put loopholes in campaign finance laws. We're talking about lists of the most powerful corporate executives in America plotting and holding meetings to plot how to implement the tenets of the Powell memo. We're talking about really a truly detailed master plan to execute what they executed, right? And the details sound like conspiracy theory, but the thing is, it's not a conspiracy theory. It's a conspiracy. It was a conspiracy, and bringing it out into physical form, publishing these documents in paper form with footnotes and endnotes that people can go check our sources on their own. You don't have to believe, that's the thing with this book. You don't have to believe me. You don't have to believe any of us at the Lever. You will have in your hands a book that will show you and let you make the call, let you do the verification. And I don't want to make the book out to be, just a pile of documents. It's not. It's all woven into a larger story. But the point is that I wanted that to exist in a physical form in an era of, frankly, digital media that oftentimes can disappear, vanish. It's under the control of the algorithms. I wanted it to be in a physical, non-digital form, frankly, for posterity.
And I love it. I haven't read the book yet, but I have listened to the whole podcast. But I've certainly flipped through the book, and I can confirm there's a lot of documents in here. There's a lot of good stuff.
Yes.
And another thing that has popped into my head. I was going to end there on that question. Tell me about why the book is there. But there's this other question that comes into my mind because I see this in internet comments all the time. People will say, Donald Trump, yeah, he's really bad, but he's not really the one who's in control. And then they point to all sorts of other ideas of who's really in control of the government. And to some degree, when you posit that there is a conspiracy, not a conspiracy theory, but a conspiracy, who's in charge of it?
Right. And I think, and that's a great question. I I want to be clear. There can be a conspiracy without there being like one guy behind the curtain, right? Like a conspiracy, when I say it's a conspiracy, what I'm saying is it's relatively small group of people with a specific plan, with specific goals that they executed. That is essentially what a conspiracy is. And so I think it's undeniable when you read this book and see these documents that this was a conspiracy. I mean, some might call it a political movement. That's fine, but it certainly was a conspiracy to manufacture the political movement that they wanted to manufacture. And and so I use that term in sort of a value neutral way. Like it was a conspiracy. Like they had a blueprint. And I think one thing I will say is that we would joke about it. There is a master plan cinematic universe for sure of these recurring characters. I mean, I mentioned to you, I'll give you one as my favorite. Um, like one of them is Robert Bork as an example, John Roberts. There's all sorts of these recurring characters. My favorite is in the original case that took that radical theory that money in politics isn't corruption or, disproportionate influence. Money in politics is constitutionally protected speech. That was a radical fringe theory, right? I mean, if you really put your mind to it and you really think about it, it's one of those things, and the conservative movement's really good at this, coming up with things that sound intrinsic if you think about them for 10 seconds, and then sound insane if you think about them for like a minute. And money is speech. You're like, oh, that makes sense. And then you're like, wait a minute, let me just like really think through what that actually means. Like that's actually kind of crazy if you really think through it. So it was a really fringe theory, and the fringe theory was first architected back in the 1970s by John Bolton, like the same John Bolton. John Bolton was a part of the legal team in the Buckley v. Vallejo case, that case that enshrined money is speech. John Bolton not only articulated that when he was working at a conservative think tank with another guy who became a federal judge named Ralph Winters, John Bolton served on the legal team to enshrine that ultimately into Supreme Court precedent. So I bring that up just to tell you that all of these characters that keep recurring, it's a reminder that it really was a relatively small group of people who really engineered this. And I think there's actually something weirdly optimistic about this, which is that I worry that people see the corruption, the deregulation of the campaign finance system, the ending of anti-bribery laws as this like force of nature that just sort of happened, like it just this divine force or this inevitability. But I think knowing that it was a specific plan executed by a specific set of people is a reminder that it was artificial and manufactured, which means that it can be repealed, changed, removed, pushed back on, because it's not a force of nature. It is not inevitable, right? So it's a reminder. And remember one other thing. The conservatives who engineered this, at the very beginning, they were proposing things that almost certainly seemed completely unrealistic and impossible. It was the sort of the height of the New Deal Democratic coalition of that era of politics, when conservatives really felt embattled and in the minority of the minority, and they got to work. And so I bring that up in saying that, repealing Citizens United, that's unrealistic, or changing how corporations are defined under state law. Oh, somebody could come along and even if you do that, they'll short circuit it. The Supreme Court will. Or publicly financing elections. That's pie in the sky stuff. I take a look at the master plan and I say, that's exactly what people were probably telling the master planners back then. And they organized and wrote down and executed a plan, not over like a year or two, but over decades. They had their eye on the prize. And it's a reminder that I know we live in an instant gratification culture that wants solutions, immediately. And then, if you don't get them within, 2 seconds, people just drop out. This is to undo this and to get to where I think we need to go. And I say that not as a Democrat, a liberal, or conservative or Republican. If you want a less corrupt system that actually responds to the needs of the people, this is going to take the rest of your lives. Like, this is going to take a long time. And we have to be mature enough and committed enough to the cause to see it through, because it cuts against everything that kind of the algorithms and social media and the internet and our culture at large tells us to expect, which is instant results. This is not an instant results kind of thing. This is like a rest of your life kind of thing.
So that's inspiring. It's daunting, but there's one advantage that Powell and his cronies had in their pockets that the other team doesn't, which is gobs and gobs of money. So where does that come from? And can you do it without that?
That's a great question. It's a really, really great question. I mean, look, the history of, frankly, the history of humanity is the fight, is really the struggle between lots of human beings and lots of wealth. I mean, literally going back to the kings, right? To the it's 1,000 years ago, right? Kings and warlords. I think the history of humanity is that ultimately the people win out. There are a lot of ups and downs. There are a lot of times where authoritarianism and oligarchy, monarchy, et cetera, are winning out. But I do think over the long reach of history, people win out. But I don't think disengaged people win out. I don't think, the Democrats win the election, I go back to brunch wins out. Like, that may win an election or two, or let's just wait for Donald Trump to just become so unpopular that anybody running against him wins, and then that sort of structurally changes things. I was interested to see Georgia Senator John Ossoff recently on Pod Save America. Pod Save America has a very sort of liberal Democratic audience. And Ossoff said something that my guess is sort of potentially ticked off a lot of those listeners. And he said, and I'm paraphrasing here, he said, listen, the real problem in politics right now is billionaire and corporate money. And we can get rid of Donald Trump, but that's still going to be the problem. And he's absolutely right. He's 100% right. And the one of the determining factors of whether we will have a less corrupt, more functional democracy is about the question of, when Donald Trump is gone, do liberals and Democrats just go back to brunch and think everything's fine now? Because I believe deeply in my heart that if that happens again, as it happened after the Bush era with Obama, Obama won, everyone gets to go back to brunch, no problem. If that happens again, things will be as bad or worse for the country, with an as bad or worse Donald Trump seizing on the future disillusionment again.
100%. And I think that is a great message to end on. When we win, when we fight, it's going to involve also a lot of continuing work. It's going to involve being on committee.
Vigilance.
It's going to be involved in vigilance. It's going to be holding people to task, not just with angry tweets, but actual mechanics and brawling. Brawling needs to happen. And we lost that when we got too really into our Eggs Benedict or whatever it was that we liked so much. Anyway, Master Plan, David Sirota and Jared Jakang Mayer, also co-author on this. Great guy. And thank you so much. There will be links in the description to get the books and learn more about David. So thank you so much for
thank you
on the show.
Thanks a ton for having me.
Okay, a little housekeeping before I sign off here. I want to let you know that I am shutting down my company, PokeyBear LLC. I know it was a great name for a company that literally pokes the bear, but I'm reincorporating it with my main publishing company called Foxtopus Inc. And there are all sorts of tax and legal reasons and insurance reasons for this. But just know that it's still your home for independent journalism on the internet. So, and thanks for watching.